I'm now going to teach you how to do the binding step for this bag. There are two finishing options, a binding option and an option to turn it through a pocket. The pocket method is a little more advanced, so if you aren't feeling very comfortable with that, I suggest doing the binding option. And I have a video earlier on that talks about 3 different ways to bind. One using homemade bias tape, or sorry, store-bought bias tape. The second using homemade bias tape with a slightly different method of installation. I call it the quilt binding method. And third is with vinyl binding. And for this video, I'm going to show you the one using the quilt binding method. So I've already made my bias strips using fabric that's 3 inches wide and folded in half lengthwise and ironed. And I have already taken my linings and my exteriors and I have clipped them together all the way around. First, I located the center marks on both of the tops and on the bases, and I clipped them there, and then I clipped in between. Now this is not a fully complete bag. I had to redo this video, and so this bag has no pockets or straps, but it has the right shape and I can still show you how to bind using this. So first, I am going to baste all the way around close to the edge. Now that this is basted together, we'll treat it as one piece going forward. So now we're going to sew. We're first going to clip on the gusset to the exterior. So find your mark. Mine has almost faded, but it's there. Your mark on the bottom base. Oh, actually, first unzip your zipper. So I have a mark on my center bottom of my gusset, and I'm going to match that up with this base. And on the other side, same thing. Now make sure that you mark the center of your zipper as well. For this one I didn't need to because I sewed the zipper together, 2 zippers together, but make sure you know the center of your zipper and make sure that you're sewing the right side of your gusset and zipper to the right side of the exterior. And then I'm going to clip on this side too, matching up with my center zipper. And then I'm going to do everything in between. I generally clip a quarter of the fabric at a time, a quarter of the purse. I'm going to go move over to this top corner. And when I am sewing down this zipper, I make sure to push it as flat as possible, especially around these tight corner curves. And I adjust it as necessary. So I've done that quarter, and I'm going to repeat the rest of it off camera. Now that everything is, the gusset is clipped on all the way around, you'll be going around another time and basting these together. I would switch to a zipper foot here. Oops. And you need to keep your basting underneath or less than the 3/8 inch seam allowance. So either a scant 3/8 inch or a 1/4 inch. And the next step will be sewing the bias tape on. Now if you want to cut this down a few steps, you can try doing the previous 2 steps at the same time, basting around the edges plus or clipping the gusset to the edge before you've basted around it. But I find it a little easier when I don't have to worry about so many layers moving apart. And at this step, if you wanted to, instead of just basting right here, you could sew it at 3/8 of an inch while doing the bias tape at the same time. But that's a lot of things to think about, especially if you're making this for the first time. So I would just baste it at this point, and then come back the next step with the bias tape. It does mean going around the purse multiple times though. You're going to have some places where you might have to go slowly because of lots of layers. Or even hand crank your sewing machine, so just take it slow. Okay, this next seam is the one that you need to follow the seam allowance of 3/8 inch or 1 centimeter. This will be visible from the outside. So make sure you're sewing straight, and we're going to start with our bias tape. I'm going to fold this end down a little bit like that and just start sewing right over it. If you have a button on your machine to push to keep it the needle down when you're not using it, that would be a good time. Now would be a good time to use it. Okay, the place where you need to be the most careful is around the top corners. You do not want to catch your zipper teeth in this, so make sure you're pushing your zipper down flat as you go. On these bottom curves, just move the purse, try to make it as flat as possible. Okay, when I get close to the end, I'll let the bias tape overlap a little bit. So I'm done with the first step of the binding. Okay, now we need to go around and turn this bias tape all the way around. I will be sewing it from this side, so I'm gonna clip it on this side. But if you have any places where you can, where you check and maybe the bias tape doesn't completely cover the stitching. Now, of course, there's several levels of stitching here. This is the seam that basted the foam on, and that will be visible. But these other seams should be covered up. So if it's a thick place with lots of layers and your tape won't go all the way around, then just trim it a little bit right there. So I'm going to clip this all the way around. Okay, I've got the bias tape clipped all the way around. Okay, before we used a thread that could be seen from the outside. Now I'm going to switch to a thread that blends in with my binding. I'm going to start sewing from this side. If you sew from the back, that will work too, but I like to have the edge closest to the zipper to be the clean edge. So we're going to edge stitch our binding, and I'm going to lengthen my stitch a bit. And the trick with binding is making sure you catch it all along the back. So I will check frequently to make sure I've caught it. And before I sew, I just visually look, does this seam look like it's going to be underneath that needle? And if it looks like it, then I sew it. Try to keep a consistent distance from the seam. Occasionally we'll look back to make sure that I'm catching the bottom seam. It looks like I am. Right, when you're all done, go around the back side and make sure you caught the bias tape all the way around. And then you can fix it if you didn't. And then your purse can be turned right side out. Now you have two choices. If you want to, you can press this top edge down and top stitch just from here over to here if you want the bias tape to be folded down a little more, but I generally find that if you just press it pretty well. Right now I'm just using my fingers, but you use the iron as well. And then zipping it will train it into the right position. So you are done with the binding version.